All right, we are back. I got a new book in. I will be reading. It's a book written by Ed Parker. Not reading this today. Well, maybe I'll read it later on this evening. I already put out From Here to the Great Unknown. I had to stop it a little shorter than I normally plan to read because it upset me a little bit what was written. And I really wanted to see what y'all thoughts were on it. So if you haven't seen the episode from earlier with the picture of Riley on it, go watch it. Watch it to the end. I think it's 12 or 13 minutes. And see what I'm talking about. And of course, we are going to, this episode, if you clicked on it, you know we're going to be reading the Lucy DeBarbin and Desiree Matara story, Are You Lonesome Tonight? About potentially a daughter. Now, some of y'all have read this, some of you not. If you have not, it's been a long time since I read it. So it's all a bit fresh for me. I emailed Desiree Matara. I might be talking to Desiree. I might be doing a Zoom with Desiree to talk about what he thought then, what he thinks now. We'll see whether he agrees to that. But like I said, I just got into it. I know that some of y'all don't want to read this, and I get it. Got a couple negative comments on it yesterday, and I understand, because if indeed this woman, Lucy DeBarbin, is trying to take advantage of Elvis, which will sue the estate, she never did that. She never sued the estate, as far as I know. She didn't do this while Elvis was alive. So a lot of the comments were, well, if she was really his daughter, she would have done it while he was alive. Why all these afterwards? Because we all know Parker, first off, would destroy people's lives if he needed to. There's been a lot of stories out there, which, anyhow, but why would she? Why would she wait? Well, she wouldn't want the spotlight and focus. What I found out through watching a few videos last night was that she was in an arranged marriage at 11. That kind of person doesn't want attention. Maybe this is a true story. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I want to read it, and I want to give you all the opportunity. So if you want to say that you don't believe it or it's baloney, please put it in the comments. You know, for those of you that do believe it, put that in the comments. I mean, I'll read it. I'll consider it, all that stuff. I mean, my mind is a bit open. It's more skeptical than it is accepting right now. So let's go. So we stopped here where she starts to give some background, I think, on herself. And by the way, the last thing, too, I want to add is that it took 2 years, I think, for them to write this. It took almost a year and a half or 2 years before this Desiree Matara could even get her to agree to do it. So it wasn't like she was looking for a payday, or at least a quick payday. I don't know whether she profited on this book. I'm assuming she would have had to have gotten something, but it wasn't even supposed to be a book. It was supposed to just be a conversation and possibly something in the magazine. Anyways, and that was because of Desiree, not because of Lucy, according to Desiree, the author. All right, I remember the fire. It was one of my first memories. I was 3 years old. A crowd of relatives had gathered in the front yard and stood quietly under the tall oak trees. I saw some men splash a liquid around the base of our 2-story wood frame house. A thin man threw a torch upon it and quickly jumped back. I heard a whoosh sound and felt the heat against my cheeks as the fire devoured my home. No one tried to put it out. I held onto my mother's leg, and I stared into the bright orange flames, wondering what it all meant. Everything that happened so suddenly. It had happened so suddenly. The memory is a blur of sounds, people, and colors. My father had just come home from a long trip. We had the usual feast to celebrate his return. Afterwards, the children were shooed upstairs, and the grown-ups could drink and carry on. I was still awake when the party ended, too excited by this noise to sleep. I crept downstairs, and I saw my father sitting in his rocking chair. He spotted me and smiled and stretched out his arms. I ran to him and jumped in his lap. My older sisters later described my father, Alfred Joseph DeBarbin, as a tall, handsome man with blue eyes and thick, grayish blonde hair. He was always well dressed, usually in a 3-piece suit, accented by a dangling gold chain that led to the pocket watch he carried in his vest. He often tied a colorful cravat around his neck and was fond of knee-high boots, which he kept shiny and polished. He was born and raised in Paris, and some members of his family were said to be prominent in the French government. In the early 1900s, a large group of my ancestors from both sides came to America and settled in Boston. My father met my mother when he was in his late 40s and she was only 16. Wow, 40 and 16. They were opposites. She was petite, just under 5 feet tall, with pale blue eyes set off by black hair that hung past her waist when she combed it out each night. During the day, she wore it knotted at the nape of her neck in a chigan that was held in place by 2 large tortoiseshell hairpins. Both families scorned their marriage. His people didn't think mother had proper breeding. Her family was from Nice, or I think it's called, and believed that anyone from Paris sounded like a scoundrel, or was. Besides, he was much too old. Despite these misgivings, the marriage was solid. Mother had 13 children. The only 7 survived infancy. I was the last daughter and the next to last child. Now this is Lucy talking. My family was part of the splinter group that migrated from Boston to Chalmette, Louisiana, a small French enclave a few miles from New Orleans. My great-grandfather, Louis James Bellevue de Barbin, had set off on an earlier wave of immigration when French government sent him to Louisiana as a munitions and customs official during the colonization of the 1700s and early 1800s, prior to the Louisiana Purchase. Many of his descendants chose to settle in Chalmette and New Orleans rather than return to France, so we were among friends and relatives. My father served as a county sheriff for a while, and later had an interest in a cattle ranch in Houston that forced him to travel frequently. He was 75 when I sat in his lap that night, but I had no conception of age. He was energetic and quick to laugh or sing. He was proud of his French heritage and made all of his children learn French before they learned English. French was the only language I knew at the time, and it was the only language my mother ever spoke. That night, as he held me on his lap, he said, "Ma petite bee, you're going to be a beautiful woman one day and sing like a nightingale." He started to hum after the ball was over and said, "Ma chérie, sing with me." He sang it a few times, and I tried to parrot the English lyrics. All of a sudden, he started coughing violently. He ordered me to get him some water. I ran to the kitchen, but couldn't reach the faucet. I ran back to tell him, but someone grabbed my shoulders and held me back. I peeked around their legs, and I saw my mother sitting on the couch with my father's head in her lap. She was hugging him and crying. My father was no longer alive. So, this is some background about the lady that's claiming that Elvis and her had a child. So I know it's about 6-7 pages, but I think it's probably important to this. I know everybody wants to read about Elvis and hear about Elvis, but let's get through this, and I'll see if Elvis pops up in the next section, and start reading. I found out later that he had tuberculosis. As was our custom among French immigrants, the relatives burned down our house the next day, thinking that it would help stop the spread of the disease. I had not only lost my father, but my home as well. My family was placed under the dominating hand of my stern maternal grandmother, Alicia Lachini Lanoux or something. She was a heartless old woman, permanently unhappy about being uprooted from her beloved niece. She hated America and Americans. She shrouded herself in mourning clothes, long black dresses, and black bonnets, and peered down at us through wire-rimmed glasses. She walked with a cane, which she brandished about while condemning everyone to hell. My grandmother had never stopped hating my father, and that hatred spilled over to his children. We immediately became disposable. We had so much when my father was alive. The house was large and well furnished. We never wanted for anything. After he died, everything vanished in the fire. Anything else that we had was confiscated by my grandmother, and my family became impoverished overnight. My grandmother forced my mother to work as a common maid and sent my 5-year-old sister Mary and me back to Boston. My younger brothers and 2 sisters remained in Chalmette. I never knew why we were separated, but even at that young age I sensed that my grandmother disliked me most of all. "Your parents both have blue eyes, but you have green eyes," she told me once. "That's a sign you are evil." In Boston, we moved in with a widow named Nini Shador, a kind woman in her 60s. No one ever explained who she was, though I recall someone saying she was the wife of one of my father's brothers. We called her Tanti Nini. She lived by herself in a magnificent 3-story house that was so tall I could see the lights of the city from my bedroom window. Despite the surroundings, I wasn't happy about being taken away from my family. When I was 5, I went on an outing with some older girls from the neighborhood. We were riding on a horse-drawn wagon in the country, making stops to gather flowers. I took off my shoes and sat on the wagon, dangling my feet over the side. The girls made me promise to sit there and not move while they ran off to play. Well, I quickly became bored and decided to jump into the muddy water a few feet away. When I landed, I felt a sharp pain in my foot. I stepped out and discovered my foot was bleeding. The girls ran over and pleaded with me to stop crying. They told me not to tell anyone what happened. Well, as the months passed, the pain in my foot increased. The girls were still afraid of getting into trouble and repeated the request that I not tell anyone. I obeyed and withstood the pain. Shortly afterwards, Tante Nini told me I was too serious and sad for a child and sent me back home to my mother. I was pleased, but the pain in my foot tempered my happiness. Back in Chalmette, I attended a convent school and began limping. I was soon unable to wear a shoe on that foot because it was swollen and sore. The other kids at school thought I was crippled and avoided me. With no friends, I turned my attention to schoolwork. I studied hard, won some merit awards, I learned English, but I found that it was my foot, not my language, that scared the other children away. I continued to endure the pain because of my vow to my friends in Boston. I didn't want to get them in trouble. My uncle, Geoffrey Bellevue de Barbin, unexpectedly arrived from France one day. He was a jolly man who looked a lot like my father, except his hair was darker, and he sported thick, bushy sideburns. He was a doctor, and he asked me in French about my foot. I decided to confide in him. I told him about jumping off the wagon into the muddy water. He examined the scar and told me that there was something inside that must be removed. He convinced my mother to send me back to Boston so he could operate. Well, when he opened my foot, he found a green thorn. It had entered near my toe, and in the year since I had the accident, it had traveled almost to the center of my foot. He said it was a miracle that I did not lose my foot from infection. I was elated because not only was the pain gone, but more important, I could wear a shoe. I could become just like the other kids and wouldn't be shunned anymore. Free from the pain and stigma, my personality began to blossom. I soon had many friends. My mother continued working as a maid, cleaning churches and large houses, scrubbing floors, washing windows, and working herself to the bone. She would come home exhausted and depressed. She never smiled anymore. So her mother, if her dad was 40 and she was 16, and the dad died at 75, that is a 24-year difference. So she would have been 51, having to do this hard manual labor. I knew her opportunities were limited because she couldn't speak English. My father's last words about me growing up to be a beautiful singer stuck in my mind. I wanted to be successful so I could help my mother. I practiced singing every day, learning everything from opera to popular tunes. I learned to control my voice and alter the tones. When I was 11, the nuns at the convent asked me to sing in a large, beautiful church, St. Anthony of Padua. I sang high soprano solos in Latin at Mass. One day, the house mother told me that my grandmother had come to see them. They said I would be moving away soon. I couldn't believe it. Here I was finally settling in somewhere and had to leave again. When I got home, there was a party going on. The house was full of strangers, mostly men. A well-dressed woman introduced herself and told me to call her Aunt Victoria. After dinner, I was asked to sing. That was a routine at our parties, and I loved performing. I had recently learned the song Mother Macri and dedicated it to my mother. I could see the tears in her eyes as I sang. She told me later that the strangers were friends of my grandmother and had come to visit because of me. They were interested in helping me study music. They would furnish us with a nice home, and things wouldn't be as hard anymore. My mother could give up her terrible job, and I was thrilled. I was only 11, and already my singing had helped. A few days later, my mother went off to live in a wonderful new home in Monroe, Louisiana. I was put in the care of Aunt Victoria. She was about 40 and tall, with short, curly black hair. She was obviously wealthy because she had a closet full of fur coats and adorned herself with diamond rings, earrings, and necklaces. She began dressing me in her image. While I loved the new clothes and acted out fantasies in the mirror, playing the part of a sophisticated lady out of town. My hair was long and black like my mother's, and I experimented with different styles. Aunt Victoria caught me primping one day and said, "Lucy, you're a very pretty girl, and your bosoms are very large. You look older than you really are. Some young man might be interested in you. Don't tell anyone how young you really are." I didn't like that. I was already self-conscious about my bosoms. I wanted to look like my friends. Their bosoms were flattered, and they could wear smock dresses. I was always trying to hide my figure under baggy clothes. Well, 2 weeks later, Aunt Victoria said that my grandmother was coming to discuss my future. She arrived promptly and ordered me to cooperate with her family's wishes. She said a green-eyed girl like me would go wayward if she didn't get married. I couldn't believe what she was saying. Married? I was only 11. I'd never even had a boyfriend. I don't know anyone to get married to, I said. I don't want to get married. I have to study. She told me that I didn't have to worry about finding a husband. It was all arranged. There was a nice man who thought I was pretty and agreed to marry me. I would be taken to him in Jackson, Mississippi. No, I will not do this, I said. My mother will never agree to this. My grandmother told me if I didn't do as I was told, my mother would be thrown out of the new home and forced to work as a maid again. Do you want to see your mother work herself to death? She admonished. I was then instructed to tell my mother that getting married was my idea and I would be happy. A week passed. I thought it had all been a horrible dream. Then Aunt Victoria and my grandmother came and told me to pack my things. They put me in a big black car and drove me to Mississippi. I was introduced to a man I remembered having seen at my house when I sang. He was tall, about 6 feet, thin, and had a ruddy complexion and dark reddish hair streaked with gray. He was at least 45 or older, and he smelled of alcohol. He was to be my husband. I had never been kissed, and now I was to be the wife of a 45-year-old man. I was taken to a wide gray house with tall ceilings and dusty rugs. The man's sister came to stay with me and prepare me for my wedding. She looked like the house, drab and gray. She kept asking, "What's wrong with you?" because I was pale and frightened. I was so afraid that I would keep throwing up in the bathroom. A second woman, equally unpleasant, came in and handed me a dismal skirt and jacket to wear as my wedding gown. I was told that the man didn't want anything special so as not to attract attention. Well, obviously, this poor girl's 11 and you're 45. I knew it was because of my age. The women left me alone to dress. I stared in the mirror trying to understand why all this was happening. I kept telling myself that God has a reason for everything. I thought of running away, but where would I go? Where could I go? I was in a strange city, and even if I did escape, they would force my mother to go back to work. So I tried to stay strong. I brushed away the tears so no one would see them. I was taken outside and put in a car between the man and his sister. No one said anything. I remember it being rainy and dreary. I was brought before a man dressed in black, a justice of the peace. He mumbled some words without smiling and ordered me to say, "I do." I did, as I was told. With a strange man beside me and 2 strangers standing beside me, I was married. We were driven back to the house. The women left. I was alone with the man. That night I tried to stall as long as I could to keep him away. I knew something awful was going to happen, but I didn't know what. No one had told me anything. He kept approaching me and putting his hands on me. I pushed him away. I ran upstairs and I hid in a closet. I got on my knees and begged God to let me wake up from this horrible nightmare. Instead, I heard a loud banging on the door. The voice was angry and cold. "I know you're in there. I'm tired of waiting. You come out right now." So I crawled deeper in the back of the closet. He started banging harder and shouting louder. He began throwing his body against the door. I was terrified and began screaming. The door burst open. He reached in, dragged me out, and threw me on the bed. Ripped off my clothes until I was completely bare. I was so ashamed. I tried to cover up, but he spread upon my arms and took my body. I will never forget the pain. So, this is the woman that is stating that she had a child with Elvis later on in life. I guess what I think I know about Elvis is that if he heard a story like this, he would be instantly attracted to the young woman, horrified for her, because what he considered was very special and important, which is innocence, was taken from her. To this day, Lucy doesn't realize or has refused to accept the fact that she was sold to the highest bidder. The party at her house was actually a discreet auction with Lucy as the prized property. Aunt Victoria was probably the wife of the local marriage broker, or probably a marriage broker herself. Lucy's singing performance was geared towards titillating the buyers and opening their wallets. The winner of this auction was Richard Dixie W.D. Ware, an underachiever whose stake came from a family aviation business and sold minor real estate transactions. The house was in Monroe that Ware offered Lucy's family. May have been only part of the price he paid for a beautiful 11-year-old thoroughbred. To some, this account may read as though it took place in another century. Actually, such marriages were not uncommon in 1947. The French have a tradition of arranged marriages and refer to them as mariages de convenience, I guess. A 1961 study by Wesley D. Camp, PhD, determined that the French had the highest frequency of marriages in the younger ages of all European countries. In America, the 1980 census reported that all married women, 3,284,682, were married at age 15 or below. Wow. Broken down yearly, the National Center for Health Statistics reports that in 82, the most recent year was surveyed, that 9,214 girls in America who married at age 15 or below, including 67 at age 12, 198 at age 13, and 1,498 at 14. No state allows legal marriages between age 12, so there's no statistics for younger ages. These figures don't account for people who lie about their age on their marriage licenses, nor do they include 8 states that failed to report age breakdowns in their figures. It is also significant that Lucy was brought to Mississippi to be married. In 1947, the minimum legal age a girl could marry with parental consent in Louisiana was 16. In Mississippi, the minimum age was 12. At the publication of this book in 1987, Mississippi has raised the age to 15, 1 year higher than Alabama and New York. If one is inclined to believe that we progressed beyond such archaic practices, consider the turnaround of the state of New Hampshire. In 1925, the minimum age for girls in this forward-thinking state was 18, the highest minimum in the United States, and by the age, social reformers were pushing for a national law. By 1987, the minimum age a girl could marry with parental consent in New Hampshire had plunged to 13, from 18, so it went backwards. So, what do y'all think about that? I mean, is this somebody that's doing a money grab, waited till Elvis died? Never sued this state, I don't think, unless y'all have something that maybe I haven't seen. Took 4 years or 5 years for this book to complete because it took a while to even get to Lucy from the daughter that wanted her mom to tell the story, and then 2 years to write it. It doesn't feel or appear to me like that. But we're on a search together. I want to know your opinions. There's no right, no wrong right now, because first off, we don't know. Unless there was a DNA test, we're not going to know either way. So far, it doesn't seem like there's anything harmful in this book, and that's the important thing. If there starts to become something harmful, I think, to Elvis's reputation, we do defend Elvis here, I will, either skip over it or we will stop reading it. But it's a very interesting book. I remember reading it when I was 16, and I thought at 16 or 17 when I read it that she was Elvis's daughter. I'm an intelligent person. My IQ is close to 140. Not that matters. It doesn't really matter. Common sense in this world is what matters. I feel like I've got pretty good common sense. But once again, I'm not going to be upset at y'all if you say, I don't believe it, it's rubbish, money grab, whatever you say on here. I'm not going to be upset about it. I want to know your opinion, and I also want to know those of you that believe in it. And of course, like I said, I just got this book in the mail yesterday. We are going to start reading this too. Maybe we'll read some of this book, which looks to be in great shape. Ed Parker wrote it, called Inside Elvis. Let's open up and read a page. Okay, if you stuck this far with me, why not? Let's see here. Let's go. So Ed Parker, martial art guy. All right. As we left, the news media patiently waited outside, sent a representative to ask that I give them a release. I referred him to Joe Esposito since he was in charge of the service. Joe told the press delegate that 3 representatives would be allowed to come to the house at 6:30 p.m. to receive the information that would be supplied for all media. In deference to the family's wishes, the offer was accepted. We got back in our cars and headed to Elvis's house under full police escort. When we arrived at the house, the atmosphere began to lighten. Our duty was fulfilled. Elvis was... Oh, that's more towards the end. I don't want to read that. One particular night, Elvis was playing spectator at the Tom Jones show. I was wearing a tight-fitting, custom-tailored suit. I mentioned to Elvis before we left for the show that I was concerned that the shoulder holster would show underneath the contours of this particular suit. Elvis said, no problem. Reaching over, he handed me his own personal 25 caliber automatic. It was small and had a belt clip that I could wear in the small of my back. When Tom Jones introduced Elvis, Red and I stood up on each side of him like bookends. We reached over to move the table so that Elvis could step into the aisle and wave to the fans. And at that point, the 25 caliber fell out of my belt onto the floor. You could hear the murmurs from the crowd going back and forth like waves rippling across the sea. Word that bodyguards were packing heat carried through the entire place in a matter of seconds. Tom made the mistake of introducing Elvis 3/4 of the way through the show. Prior to that moment, over-exuberant females in the audience had removed their panties and were waving them around trying to attract Tom Jones' attention. At the instant he introduced Elvis, we could see the waving garments change direction in midair. The entire focus attention was suddenly on our booth. There was a mass migration toward our way. So that's part of what we're going to read. We read that as well. Inside Elvis is not just another book about Elvis. It's an intimate revelation, my gosh, of the man behind the myth, the soul of an idol. Ed Parker. Anyhow, all right, let me know what you think. This is Rare Elvis Photos, TZB TLC. I'll be back in a while.